All right. Hi, everyone. I know you can't hear the mic that I'm speaking into, but it's because we are doing a live stream of Free Code Camp tonight. So thank you all for coming. As I said earlier, we have Quincy Larson, who is the founder of freecodecamp.org. So this is super exciting for us. And he's like, and Quincy is. Are you originally from Oklahoma City? So this is pretty cool that we have somebody who is local to the area who has now gone, expanded his wings and his radius of not only technology, but going into the community and teaching people how to code and the importance of becoming a developer. So I know we kind of advertise a number of different things that we're covering for tonight. So I'll really let Quincy get into that. But again, as I mentioned, we have, I just want to thank the Norman Free Code Camp group. The organizers are Joe and Chris and myself. And to all of you who have continued to come since the early summer, thank you so much. We also have Kimberly, who is with our Free Code Camp OKC, who got that started some point last year, a year and a half ago-ish. And she's also with Techlahoma. We're also doing this in partnership with Hacklahoma, which is our OU student organization. So that's awesome. And then again, this is the Tom Love Innovation Hub. So we hope you guys continue to come back after Quincy's talk today. If you have not been to the Tom Love Innovation Hub before, I'm happy to give you a tour and show you all of the different resources that we have available here to you. Our biggest goal is how can we help to improve and grow the business, entrepreneurship, and innovation space of the state. And so if you have an idea and you want to see it to come to fruition, we want to help you here at the Tom Love Innovation Hub make that happen. So without further ado, and again, this is very casual, so if you need to get up, have a bio break of some sort, feel free to do so. And here's Quincy Larson.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. We're great, and I guess we just put it in my pocket. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
I'll let you put it in your pocket.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Greetings. Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight on Tuesday night, where you could be studying or just relaxing. So it means a lot to me that you all came to hear me talk about things. And things I shall talk about. We've got a lot to cover. I've never used this laptop before, so I'm just going to navigate over to. Thanks for Kristen for setting all this up. So, a lot of people love to use like Google Slides or PowerPoint. I am just going to use GitHub Gist, and I'm going to tell you all the URL for it as well. 1 second. Let me attempt to navigate to Chrome and get it to not be full screen. View.
The little green dot.
Okay, the little green dot. All right, 1 second. Is there a way that I can make it like really big but not completely full screen? Well, I guess I can just navigate to the website. So the reason I made it a GitHub Gist is so you all can go there and follow along. It has tons of links to relevant things. So the link is fcc.im/GoSooners. Okay. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit and see if I can get this screen thing working. All right. So the topic of today's talk is how to learn to code and get your first developer job. So before we really get started and drill into that, I wanted to ask just a few questions to better understand you all and who you are and what brings you here. First of all, how many of you are currently students? Okay, good. How many of you are currently students in a computer science program? How many of you are currently students in a computer science program here at OU? Okay. How many of you are students who are considering switching into computer science from another major? Okay, got a few of those. How many of you are previous graduates who are considering going back and getting a computer science degree? Okay. A few more questions. How many of you are already working as developers? Okay, great. That's quite a few of you. How many of you are looking to get a better developer job than the one you currently have? Okay, you don't have to admit it in case your employer might be watching the stream or something, right? Okay, so that gives me a nice feel for everybody who's here. So now that I know a little bit about you all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I was a 30-something school director, teacher. I didn't know how to code at all. I would often have my wife reconfigure the router whenever we moved because I would just get frustrated. I didn't have the patience for it. But I was running a school out in Santa Barbara, California, and I decided that I wanted to help my teachers and my admin staff spend more time with students and less time chained to their desk doing rote back office workflows. So I learned some very basic automation. I just Googled around and picked up some tools like AutoHotkey, Excel macros, things like that. And I started trying to automate parts of the school so that people could spend more time with students. And it worked. That's the amazing thing is me, some 30-something guy who had no technical experience, grabbing off-the-shelf tools and getting them to work. And that lesson, that revolutionized the school. Just one person learning some basic coding and applying it. The school grew really rapidly, and the students were much happier. We had a net influx of students from other schools in the school system. So that really drove home to me, wow, even a little bit of technological know-how can be tremendous leverage in terms of accomplishing real world outcomes. In this case, helping a school become more efficient. So that drove me to learn to code properly. So I ultimately left my job, which is something I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Left my job. I just went to hackathons every weekend. I hung out in the hacker space in Santa Barbara, and I just coded all day long while everybody else was at work. And I just put myself out there as much as possible. I would go to San Francisco several weekends a month just to go to tech events and things like that. And that helped propel me to my first developer job. And that first developer job really is where I started to learn a whole lot about how software is made. And that developer job gave me a lot of insight into how software development education could be improved. And so I put on my teacher cap and I started thinking about that. And that ultimately, after about 2 years of creating open source projects, led to freeCodeCamp. So another question for people, how many of you have heard of freeCodeCamp before? freecodecamp.org, the website. Okay, how many have used freeCodeCamp before? Okay, cool. Well, I won't drill into like the exact ways that you used it or anything like that, because I want to move quickly so we can answer questions. But basically, this talk is going to be primarily about how you can get a good developer job, and if you have a good developer job, how you can continue to progress your career and continue to develop your skill set. So in my opinion, the main things that you need to do to get a really good developer job are you need to build your skills, you need to build your reputation, and you need to build your network. A lot of people think it's just about skills, and that if they just grind long enough on Project Euler or some other type coding challenge website, that those skills alone will help them get a really good job. That's not necessarily the case. What is much more often the case is that it's a combination of skills and an existing reputation and having a network of people who could potentially hire you or contract you. So somebody tweeted this about a year ago, and they were trying to figure out like what's the advice for learning to code, ultimately getting a job. I recommend everybody ultimately have the goal of getting a job, because getting a job is a great place to get paid to learn and further expand your skills so you can eventually create a freelance agency, or so you can eventually create create a product company of your own. So I just responded with my answer, which some of these might be controversial, but I'll go ahead and go through them anyway. So the first one is code every day. Why should you code every day? Why is it so important? Well, the creator of jQuery, John Reisig, he's the person who really kind of initially posited the notion that one should try to code every single day. And his reasoning is primarily just like why kids shouldn't take summer break, why they should continue to have school throughout the year and maybe take shorter breaks of 2 weeks throughout the year instead of taking one giant break. And if the reason is because kids on average backslide like 5 weeks over the course of that 12 weeks. So you really have your brain is a muscle, your coding ability is a muscle. You have to use it or it starts to atrophy. So his reasoning is if you even take like a weekend off, you're going to backslide, you're going to have to sit down and figure out where you were. Anybody who's looked at code that they wrote 6 months ago can probably cringe and then testify that it's very hard to read code from even 6 months ago. So, it's not quite as bad reading code after a long weekend, but it is harder than if you have a rhythm of just coding a little bit every day. So if you really want to get ahead, my first tip is just try to code every day, even if it's just 30 minutes. Try to work it into your daily routine because it will pay off in the long run. My other thing that I would recommend, of course, is hanging out with other coders. And the good news is you're all already doing this right now at this exact moment. So there are an incredible number of events here in Oklahoma City. And this is just some of them. There was I pulled it up on Meetup. This link actually, if I can get this to open in the, wait a second, command click, that should open the link in a new tab, but instead it's trying to define it. Okay, let me just click it and then I'll navigate back. So these are the current meetups, and Meetup is just one of many platforms, by the way, that have different events. You've got Eventbrite, you've got DevPost, and a whole lot of other places that probably have events. But just look at these. These are just tech events, tech meetups here in Oklahoma City. It's an incredible wealth of people who know what they're talking about or people who are actively learning so they can know what they're talking about. And it's a great mix of practitioners, of employers. So I would strongly recommend going to as many of these events as you can around Oklahoma City. I think it will definitely yield good rewards. Let's see if I can navigate back. Okay, cool. It worked. It kept me on the same place. Okay. Tip number 3, do not overthink the tools. This is something that a lot of people do. I don't have a funny image for this. People tend to really gravitate on I want to become a Rails developer, or, I'm really interested in Elixir. The tools don't really matter. You can actually build a website using C if you want to. You'd have to be an insane person, but you could do it. And there are people who've done it, and their websites look horrible, but it just is a proof. If it's a Turing-complete language, in theory, you should be able to basically build anything, right? So don't get caught up in the tools. Don't worry about which IDE is best. All those are going to give you a marginal bump in your performance. What's really going to give you a substantial bump is just practice. And that's there are no shortcuts to anywhere worth going. You have to practice. You have to put in the time and energy. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't want to hear because that's the hard part, right? It's time intensive. So don't overthink the tools. Whatever you feel comfortable with, just stick with it. If you're already using Python and Django and you're building web apps with that, stick with it. If you're already in the C# ecosystem doing .NET development, just stick with it. There's no grass that's dramatically greener on the other side of the fence, is what I'm trying to say. And then my 4th piece of advice, focus on what to build, or focus on how to build things, not what to build. What to build is a business decision. You're going to have a whole bunch of people, as you build your developer skills, you're going to have a whole bunch of people from the entrepreneur school from the business school who are going to come to you with tons of ideas. And maybe they have domain expertise in those ideas, maybe they don't. But ideas are ubiquitous and everybody has an idea. It ultimately comes down to what should be built as proven by some sort of market need. And you're not going to find that just through doing thought experiments sitting there because there's not going to be some resounding thought that occurs to you in the shower unless you happen to be transitioning into software development from law or medicine or some other field where you have a clear domain. You understand how all the pieces fit together in that domain and how you could potentially deliver better value using technology. Instead, as a developer, for the sake of practice and improving your skills, you should totally focus on how to build things, how to implement things. And there are so many incredible lists of apps. Westboss has his JavaScript 30 course, for example, where you build 30 different web apps. There are so many different ways that you can practice your developer skills without having to bang your head and say, oh, I can't think of anything to build. There are so many projects out there. freeCodeCamp has dozens and dozens of projects that you can build, for example. This is a list that we published a while back that had a pretty good reception. A lot of people agreed with the project ideas in there. And the fifth tip that I'm going to give you today, contribute to open source. Why is contributing to open source so important? If you think about it, when you contribute to open source, you go through so many of the steps that you would go through if you were doing client work. You've got a stakeholder, the maintainer of the open source repo. You have an existing legacy code base, which is 99% of the time going to be the case. You may love building things with React Native, but there's a good chance you're not going to actually be able to build a greenfield React Native project at your first job. You're most likely going to be stuck maintaining a whole bunch of existing code. And yes, eventually you'll be trusted to make, architecture decisions and ultimately choose, different tools and build out a basic proof of concept. But don't worry so much about that. Instead, focus on getting practice working with giant legacy code bases. And this is probably the hardest and most important skill that employers are looking for that people generally lack, because what do? They want to go build toy projects. They want to go build products that they can potentially turn into startups. They don't get as much experience going to the local hospital or the local bank and saying, hey, what are you using to accomplish this? Or where's a piece of software that you need to update, or what's falling apart and can I dive in and try to fix it? Those are the kinds of real world problems that most employers actually have. So you may be wondering, how can I get started contributing to open source? Well, freeCodeCamp happens to have a repository called How to Contribute to Open Source, and it has a ton of resources on how to contribute to all kinds of different projects, Firefox, Linux, React, a whole bunch of different major open source tools. And then you can read, there's a ton of tutorials in here. This is basically just a collection of helpful resources for people who are asking, how do I contribute to open source? So that's in the gist. And then since it's October or Hacktober, Hacktoberfest is happening. How many people here have heard of Hacktoberfest? Okay, so let me just do a high-level explanation of what Hacktoberfest is. DigitalOcean, GitHub, and Twilio have basically bankrolled the posting of tens of thousands of t-shirts all around the world. So I'm not wearing my Hacktoberfest shirt from last year, but every year I enter this, and if you open 5 pull requests, they'll mail you a free shirt. And it's a really nice shirt. It's like a, American Apparel with like nice screen stuff. It's lasted me hundreds of washes and it still looks okay. So they'll mail this to you, and keep in mind they're mailing it all over the world. If you happen to be in like Egypt or something, you'll still get a shirt in the mail, which is pretty profound because it costs a lot of money. So they have put a lot of money into trying to get more people into open source. And I'm not going to be able to show you this because I have to auth through GitHub, and I don't have LastPass on here. but you can see like all the different projects that are possible and how many contributions they have. But people are opening all kinds of different issues on GitHub that have the Hacktoberfest label. And you can see here, this has many labels, but one of them is Hacktoberfest. This also has good first issue and beginner friendly. So they've really covered their bases on this issue. They really want a beginner to step in. So you can see they've got screenshots, they've got steps. And usually when people create these kinds of pull requests, you can see there's like a nice long discussion about it too. That means that these projects are totally game to sit down and answer any questions you have. Often these are bugs that they could just fix themselves really quick, but they're giving the developer community an opportunity to get practice contributing. So Hacktoberfest is a great time to make your first open source contribution. How many people here who have already made an open source contribution on GitHub? Okay, so there are a lot of you here who could potentially go out and do this tonight. freeCodeCamp, if I can just pull up the repo, I'll show you, we have, I'm not exaggerating, we have thousands of people who are, this is, how do I search within? See, all GitHub, okay, yeah. So we have thousands of people who are contributing. In fact, at some point, the number of open pull requests exceeded 5,000, and they just put a plus behind it, but it's 6,267. These are all people that are trying to contribute code to freeCodeCamp. And a big part of that is because we recently introduced 5 new world languages. We introduced Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Russian, and Arabic. So people who speak those languages are coming in and they're refining our machine translations. We spent like $2,000 running all our curriculum and all of our documentation and everything through GitHub, through Google Translate's API. So it's machine translated, but it needs the natural native speaker touch. So you can contribute to open source, and it's a great way to not only help thousands of people around the world be able to use software better, but it's also, you can cut your teeth on contributing to open source. And again, another reason why contributing to open source is so valuable is it simulates the modern workplace, especially the remote workplace. Now, even when you work for an in-person developer agency or product company, like I did for my first developer job, you are going to be spending a tremendous amount of time collaborating through software, whether that's through GitHub, whether that's through Jira, whether that's through, gosh, I don't even know what, people use GitLab, people use Trello still for a lot of things. So you're going to be collaborating through all these tools, and you're going to get a lot of experience communicating in text. And that's very important. You need to be able to write clearly. You need to be able to say what is important. You need to be able to produce the steps to reproduce a problem and, take good screenshots or create little videos that demonstrate that. You need to basically take what's in your head and put it in the head of your colleagues so they can understand what you're working on and see if they can help you. So contributing to open source when all you have is a comment box and all you have is your code is a great exercise in working within that very constrained environment where you can't just tap some neighbor on the one cubicle over and say, hey, can you take a look at this code? Because in reality, a lot of times that's not possible. A lot of times you're at home, you're working, and you just need to get something done. And a lot of organizations like GitHub encourage people to do all their work and all their communication in writing, because then there's a trail of all the discussions so people can pull up a record and see, oh, well, what caused this decision to be made? Let's go look at that. And more organizations are kind of jumping on board that text-centric approach. Like Amazon, for example, they do these long written narratives where they write down exactly what they're thinking, and then they go to meetings, and instead of talking on lunch, they pull out the written narrative, print it out on a piece of paper, and they read it together. Because the power of text is a forcing factor for clarity. So contribute to open source. That's tip number 5. So those are all things about getting better at coding. Again, if I can remember, actually I'm not going to try to remember. I'm just going to scroll up. Code every day. Hang out with other people who code. You got that one taken care of. Don't overthink the tools. Focus on how to build, not what to build, and contribute to open source. If you do those 5 things for 2 years, you'll be pretty much as good a developer as anybody, because everybody's kind of on this pioneering front of like learning new technology and new techniques. that are coming into vogue and things like that. And of course, right behind them is the bulldozer of forgetting, steamrolling everything that they've that's more than a few months in their past. Now, I'm not discounting experience. It's definitely valuable to get a lot of experience, but you can really ramp up to like an 80%, if you're thinking 80-20 developer, very quickly if you have a good strategy for absorbing this huge volume of knowledge that is software development. So that's building your skills. The second thing, building your reputation. This is your resume items. This is people knowing who you are in town when somebody says it says your name. When somebody says Joe, I know Joe because I've watched his tech talks and I've seen him at freeCodeCamp events. So some ways you can build your reputation. The obvious ones are, internships, doing freelance work, which there's no like freelance police who come out and say, oh, you're not qualified to, freelance. If you, have a friend who needs to build something, if you go to a church and they need their website updated, whatever you need to do, you can do it. And you don't need to necessarily ask for permission a lot of times too. You can just say, hey, I took all the source code from your website and I made it look better. What do you think of this? And that can be a starting point for a discussion. So you can absolutely go ahead and get freelance jobs at whatever level you happen to be at. A lot of it just comes down to your audacity, your willingness to put yourself out there. And your word is not going to get out, oh, so-and-so approached me about freelancing, but I don't think they're qualified. People don't bother talking about those kinds of things, right? It's not like they're at a dinner party and they're like, oh, Joe, he's an okay developer, but I didn't quite hire him because of X, Y, Z. Nobody says that. Nobody does that. They've got better things to think about and talk about than people that are trying to solicit them for freelance work. So you can absolutely become a freelancer immediately if you want to. The third way is just doing pro bono work. A lot of times people won't pay you to do it. Well, you can probably say, well, can I do it for free? And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. Now, if you can get away with not saying that clause, there's often people that are apprehensive about change, and more often than not, they will throw out work that they don't think they have to use. But there are a whole lot of different ways you can get involved with pro bono work. There are more than 1 million nonprofits in the United States. 1 million. That's one for every 300 people. All of those, nonprofits. Yeah, I know. I see you're smiling. Like, really? Yeah, really. Look it up. It's crazy. There are tons of nonprofits in this country, and virtually all of them, like freeCodeCamp, are very cash-strapped and would definitely benefit from, volunteers coming in and helping. So you can absolutely do pro bono work, and that'll go onto your LinkedIn, that'll go onto your resume, your CV if you're applying abroad, all kinds of things. And so that's building your relationship or building your reputation. The other way you can build your reputation is through creating social proof. Now, I strongly recommend spending a lot of time on your LinkedIn. Like it or not, that's the ultimate UX dark pattern website where they trick you into emailing all your friends. And then they email them 5 times when they said they were only going to get email once, and they get sued, and then they do a big settlement, but they keep emailing. That's LinkedIn. So it's a monopoly on professional networks, whatever the heck that is. So realistically, people are going to look for you on LinkedIn. You should have a well-groomed LinkedIn. This, by the way, this is our alumni network. If you're curious, like who uses freeCodeCamp, a lot of people on Upwork, IBM, Accenture, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and most of them are now doing software engineering, although some people are transitioning into that. So, and then you get a nice, distribution. The only reason I included this is because we're on the topic of LinkedIn. I figured I'd say it. Yeah, but here's a good example of a LinkedIn profile, in my opinion. Okay, it didn't flash the sign-in modal and blur everything. That's what I was worried about. So this guy intentionally sought feedback from the freeCodeCamp community. And when I Googled freeCodeCamp LinkedIn, I think he was one of the first people that came up, the first Google results. So you can see that he's got a nice photo of him. He's wearing a suit. It's not a bad idea. And he's got a nice title. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Yeah, he's got somebody who's recommended him. So he's a career changer. He was a realtor before. Very common for people to change into software development as a second career. He's got a nice summary that's very succinct, well written, and he's got all of his experience right here. So this is a well-groomed LinkedIn profile. He's got his Cal State Northridge is a good school. My brother went there. He's got his freeCodeCamp full stack web development certification on there, and he got a GED. So you don't even necessarily have to have a high school degree in order to be able to go and get. It looks like he got like an associate, or he got a bachelor's, 1999 through 2001. That was quick. He may have attended another school. Anyway, I'm kind of like, whenever I look at a LinkedIn profile, I always try to like figure out like the timeline and the chronology. But you can see that he's taken a lot of online courses and he's gotten a lot of professional certifications. So you can scroll through those. So he took the time to list out all these different details, and I think that is something that would reassure me as a potential employer or a freelance somebody who might contract him. So yeah, he's got everything on here, and he's a member of several groups. So he's active on LinkedIn. That doesn't hurt. It's not a strike against you if you happen to, and he's got more than 500 connections. Just get 501 connections, then you're done on LinkedIn. It's a big game. They want you to get thousands of connections and be messaging each other and spend a whole lot of time on LinkedIn. The reality is people only go to LinkedIn when they're trying to get a job. But yeah, LinkedIn can dream. So the other thing that I strongly recommend you spend time cultivating is Twitter. And a lot of people would be like, oh, Twitter, I'll have to see, all those random bots and spammers and just angry people. Because that's like, if there was one emotion that was associated with Twitter, it'd probably be rage, right? But seriously, every developer in San Francisco has a Twitter account, and they use it to communicate, and they share, they share code snippets, they share creative coding examples they built on CodePen, they share anecdotes from working as a developer. So there's a tremendous amount of insight that you can glean if you follow the right people. And if you're wondering who to follow, by the way, here's a shortcut. I follow like 500-ish people, and pretty much all of them are worth following. So if you just jump in there, that's like, in my opinion, those are the developers that are the most interesting, at least for me. And I think that it can save you some time, and you can just follow those people, and then you can decide whom you want to unfollow, and you can follow your own people too. But Twitter is a very powerful tool because people will actually respond to you. When I was first learning to code, I would just message people out of the blue, like they would be a core maintainer of Redux, for example, or something like that. And I'd just be like, hey, how's it going? I have a quick question. And the amazing thing is, because the ask is so small in Twitter direct messages, people will actually respond to them. And you can @mention them, and you can tweet at them, and they'll often respond too. So it's a great way to reach a lot of people whom would never respond to an email, or it'd be hard to even find their email address, right? So Twitter is like the great flat communication medium. And the other thing that I would recommend, the other reason why I would recommend that you use Twitter is having followers definitely helps your credibility. If you have several hundred followers, several thousand followers, people are more likely to take you seriously. When people Google your name, that'll come up usually at the top. And they'll even, if you have, they'll even show like side-by-side recent tweets, things like that. So you're constantly tweeting about technology and sharing projects and things like that. People will discover you on Google, and that can be very powerful. And then finally, I'd say that you never know when you'll want to publicize something, and Twitter's a really powerful medium for just quickly getting the word out about a new project you built. The other way to build credibility, so just to recap real quick, we talked about your resume items, your social proof, which is Twitter and LinkedIn, and now creating your content. Buy a good domain. See if you can get yourdomain.com or yourdomain.org or your full name, including your middle name.com, and consider using your middle name. My first name is Michael Larson. If you Google Michael Larson, you'll see why I decided not to just go by Michael Larson, because there's a famous guy named Michael Larson who played the game Press Your Luck. And he cheated at Press Your Luck and won like more than $100,000. He hacked the game Press Your Luck. So no matter what great, exciting things I do with my time on Earth, I'm never going to be more famous than Michael Larson, the Press Your Luck guy. So I was like, hey, I'll just use my middle name, Quincy Larson. And it turned out there were only like 3 or 4 people on earth named Quincy, at least on the internet. And most of them were just college-age girls. So I was able to quickly swoop in and get most of the domains and everything associated with that. And I would encourage you to do the same. If you have a nickname or something like that, consider going by that. I know it sounds weird to like change your name, but I did it at age 30 and it has definitely helped. Because otherwise I'd just be like buried underneath Michael Larson, the Press Your Luck guy. So create your own domain, get a good domain. And you don't have to worry about blogging consistently or anything. People don't care. People aren't sitting there like watching their RSS feeds for your new blog post to drop. The reality is people are busy, but if they see like a cool article that you wrote, that you tweeted, they might click through and read it. And most importantly, if you write about a topic that a lot of people are searching for on Google, Google may promote that. And if people click through and they spend a lot of time on your website and they click to read other blog posts that you've written, hey, your SEO is going to go up and Google is going to lend you more credibility. And that's going to help more potential employers, more potential employees later on in your career find you and respect you. So creating your own content. Don't just put it on like Medium. Don't just put it on dev.to or any of these platforms. Also have your own website because you have full control over that. You don't want to just build your castle on somebody else's land and then have them revoke your property rights, so to speak. Another thing I would recommend is just focus on a few key platforms. I think Instagram is a really popular platform that a lot of people post code, pictures of their computer, pictures of them sitting at their computer. I don't know. I don't use Instagram, but Sasha Codes, I follow her on Twitter, and she's got a really beautiful Instagram, and she posts a lot of the creative coding that she's done, and she posts a lot of pictures of her like exotic places around Silicon Valley, right? Like this roof deck. I mean, who wouldn't want to sit out there and code, right? So, if you want to do Instagram, she's a good benchmark. I would strongly recommend considering, YouTube. YouTube is the second most popular website on earth after Facebook in terms of use. And this is Dylan Israel. He is a freeCodeCamp alum, and he has an incredible trove of videos on all kinds of different topics. And he also talks a lot about his career, but you can see like he's got tons of tutorials on Vue, Sass, HTML, CSS Grid. So these are all things that you could potentially create videos about. You don't even necessarily have to get a green screen. You don't even have to have a webcam. Just fire up OBS, which I've heard that there's a great tutorial on OBS, open broadcasting software, that Joe may have released recently. Just learn how to use OBS, and you can stream on Twitch. You can stream yourself coding. Suze Hinton, she's a British developer. She streams, and she has a huge audience of people that come to just watch her code and ask her questions about why she made X decision as opposed to Y and things like that. So you can absolutely build a name for yourself through these existing platforms. And people are spending so much time on YouTube. Dylan has 50,000 followers, and before that he was just some anonymous guy kind of living in, I can't remember, he was in California, but he moved to Florida. And one of the reasons he moved to Florida, by the way, I'm going to go off on a tangent, was because that's where he found good jobs. And there was less competition than in California, where there were a lot more experienced devs. So I'd strongly recommend following his channel too. But he's got a great YouTube thing going on. And if you want to commit to a platform, first of all, you do need a Twitter, you do need a LinkedIn, but you could also have a YouTube or a Medium Medium blog, or you could have an Instagram account. I mean, there's so many different things you could do. And then the other thing that is completely blue ocean that nobody is in on yet, but we're having a golden age of podcasting. How many people here listen to podcasts? Okay, great. I'm glad that you all are turned on to the notion of podcasts and basically talk radio at your disposal. This guy, he created this Second Career Devs podcast, and it's just some developer who, and if you write people and ask them to be on your podcast, they're almost always going to say yes. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they want to come on and talk to you and have a whole bunch of people hear their voice for an hour, right? So it's a great way to meet people and really build your reputation. having podcasts, interviewing people. And even if you're just podcasting and you're talking about, your daily life or things you've learned, lessons you've learned, even if you're just bringing one of your friends on and you're chatting about software for an hour, it's great. It's pretty low effort, in my opinion. Like, we just started a podcast recently, and it's not that hard to create an hour's worth of content every week that thousands of people are going to listen to. And the other great thing about podcasting is you own it. Nobody else can come and take it away from you. It's RSS based. Yes, Apple's like the core of the podcasting ecosystem with Apple Podcasts and all that stuff, but ultimately you control. Nobody's going to censor you. Nobody's going to take your platform away from you. Nobody's going to take too much VC money and collapse Medium. So there are a lot of things that can potentially happen. We need to edit that out of the video on demand thing, by the way. Sorry, I got a little carried away. But yeah, they're like, all these platforms take so much VC money and then they just disappear, and with them, so much stuff that's been created. Like GeoCities went under, and there were millions of websites that were destroyed because GeoCities they couldn't pay their bills, so they closed down all the people who create all this content on their platform. So again, strongly emphasizing, build your own website, syndicate to other places. Don't just rely on your own. Don't just rely on other platforms, but use platforms because that's where you can get the distribution. All right, and then I'm just going to talk about a couple quick things. I don't know how much time I have. I've been rambling. So building your network. Okay, building your network. This is your peers. This is your professors. These are people who attend the events around you that could potentially hire you, and these are potentially people you message on Twitter and kick down the door and force your way into their lives, right? So these are people who can potentially vouch for you after you've pestered them 20 times. Can you say, hey, I'm trying to get a job. Can you point me to the hiring manager so I don't have to apply through the, through the black hole? So building that network in advance of applying for jobs. The time to build your network is now. I would love to see everybody shake everybody's hands and add everybody to LinkedIn or change business cards if you happen to still carry business cards in 2018. Try to meet one another, because these relationships that you can build will be invaluable toward expanding and extending your career over the next few years. And then, so a lot of you already have developer jobs. A lot of you, I can't remember, raise your hand if you'd love to have a good developer job and you don't have one. Okay, quite a few people. So how to get a job? That's the big question, right? So you probably heard that it's a lot easier to get a job through somebody you know than to apply to a web form and see what happens. That's true. Usually when you hear people say advice over and over, it is in fact true. It's just that people don't actually follow the advice that they hear. That's the problem. So I'll say it, and feel free to ignore it, but you should build your network and try to get jobs through them. Now, it doesn't hurt to, in parallel, apply to a bunch of different companies through their web forms. And we published a story from a guy who just blindly applied to Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Tesla, got interviews at all of them, and got a job at Tesla just through their web application form. But he had a really, really good resume. And I'll point you to the article, but he was dialed in. He'd had good internships. He built lots of pro bono work. You can sculpt yourself into that kind of candidate. You absolutely can do that. But if you don't have a rewind button on your life, it may be easier to just build relationships. Go through them. So in terms of actual developer interviews, who here has done a whiteboard coding interview before? Okay. Who has done a take-home assignment where they give you some sort of project you have to build at home and send in? Okay. And who has done in-person live pair programming where you have to sit there and code alongside them, and they can look at the keyboard and make quick on-the-fly judgments about you? Actually, I would say the pair programming is by far the coolest and best way. Pivotal Labs and ThoughtWorks and a lot of these high-flying consultancies, they do pair programming-based interviews because, let's face it, your ability to recite algorithms on a whiteboard is not nearly as indicative of your performance as being able to sit and actually work on real code in a real application, like you would if you were doing a pair programming interview. So I would strongly recommend preparing for all three of these because you don't know what you're going to get. Take-home assignments are the most time-intensive, but one could argue that that's the most egalitarian way to do it, especially if like companies have blind hiring policies where they don't know anything about you. They just look at your project and make decisions based on pulling apart your code. There are such companies that are out there that are hiring that way, but it's time-intensive. You have to spend a lot of time. Sometimes you have to spend 6-8 hours building like a tic-tac-toe game or something like that. A lot of people will assign you freeCodeCamp challenges as your take-home project, I've found. Because a lot of people are like, hey, I want you to build a calculator that does this and this and this. And you're like, oh, like this one? And then they're like, oh, okay, cool. Come on in for an interview. You know? So that does happen. So it doesn't hurt to build those freeCodeCamp projects. I would tell you that just some off-the-cuff advice for interviewing. Focus on what you can do for them. Don't focus on your own personal accomplishments. Don't try to like bring them up to speed on your life story. Focus on delivering value. Salary negotiation, do it. It doesn't matter if it's your first job. It doesn't matter if it's your dream job. It's very uncommon for a company to discontinue the job negotiation process if you've got an offer in hand and you ask for a little bit more money, like an extra $5,000 so I can pay off my mortgage, or because my kid's school is expensive and I want to, you know, you have to have a reason. And ideally you have, if you have a spouse, you can say, oh, my spouse was really on board with this, but some other person who's responsible. That's another cool negotiation technique. You're never the person who's telling them they need to give you more money. It's always somebody else in your life who's in charge of you. For many more, much better stated salary negotiation advice, this is, in my opinion, one of the greatest articles ever written about salary negotiation, and it's by Haseeb Qureshi. Has anybody heard of Haseeb Qureshi? So he was a former professional poker player who decided that he wanted to get into software engineering, donated all of his winnings to charity, and just ate ramen and sat down and like coded. And then he went to App Academy, which is a pretty good boot camp, and they liked him so much that they hired him to teach their algorithm class. So he did that for a year. But technically, at this point, he had zero developer experience. By the way, if you're wondering, yes, this guy is wearing boxing gloves in a suit. It's a very harsh metaphor. So Haseeb basically pivoted his career, donated all his money, and went to live like a monk and just eat ramen and code, and got that job. And then after a year, they offered him some even better job at App Academy, but he was like, I think I really want to go out and improve myself as a developer by getting a job at a big tech company. So what followed was a whole lot of applications that led nowhere, a whole lot of recruiters that led nowhere, a whole lot of random, you know, services that try to match you with, that didn't go anywhere. But eventually he got a job offer for some San Francisco startup nobody's ever heard of. And then he used that as leverage to get more offers, and then he got an offer from Google, and then he used the Google offer to get $250K a year at Airbnb. He never worked as a developer before. So it's a testament to his poker playing mentality, I guess, but also just the sheer fact that if you don't negotiate, like his first offer was like $100,000, $110,000, which in San Francisco is like sleeping on a sofa, you know, in a really rough part of town, barely able to make ends meet. It's incredible how expensive they are. You have to make $333,000 a year to even be able to qualify for a home loan in parts of Palo Alto and San Francisco. So that's a really good rate, and he was able to achieve that through negotiation. If he hadn't negotiated, he would have gotten less than half the starting salary. And he tells this entire story in another blog post, but this is the blog post if you want the actual action items from that, like 10 tips, very well written. Again, this is probably the best article on salary negotiation, in my opinion. So, and yes, you absolutely do need to practice algorithms and data structures. And here's just an image to break up the wall of text. I did an Indeed search for developers, 266 open jobs just in Oklahoma City. Not bad. I didn't do it for Norman, but I presume that if you live here, it's not a huge stretch that you might be willing to move to Oklahoma City. And you can see that the salary estimates are pretty generous. I mean, considering the median income in Oklahoma City is what, like $45,000 for household income. So virtually all the jobs pay more than that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can prepare for doing these interviews and going through these batteries. One resource is what's called Coding Interview University. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. All right, so I have just a bunch of random things I'm going to show you that we're working on that I think are cool. I don't have any cool proprietary, proprietary as far as an open source project would be concerned. No such thing, right? But I don't have any cool stuff that's just on my computer that I haven't pushed to the public yet. But I'm going to expose the deep recesses of freeCodeCamp and show you some cool stuff we're working on. So I'm just going to close a bunch of tabs. And then I'm going to jump over to freeCodeCamp.org. And, oh, somebody's authenticated. Cool. So first of all, you can see that we've got this Hacktoberfest message here. Happy Hacktoberfest. Here's how to get your free Hacktoberfest t-shirt and make your first code contributions to open source projects. Sounds promising. So currently, we are celebrating freeCodeCamp. I emailed this out last week, and it's been viewed by almost 50,000 people have read my article, which is pretty exciting. And it has a tutorial that you can follow that will help you create your first pull request. And the great news about this is I figured out, not figured out, I mean, they were always possible, but like just clicking around in GitHub's interface, it occurred to me, wow, people could make pull requests without even having to clone a repo to their local machine, which means they don't have to get all the C libraries working, which means they don't have to install Git, Homebrew, or any of the Linux tools, apt-get, or any of those things, so that they can actually be able to code locally on their computer. And freeCodeCamp, we're huge fans of tools that let you code in the browser, because it just removes a lot of the variability of local environments. How many people have gotten stuck on some sort of command line issue? Okay, quite a few of you. So how many people have spent more than an hour Googling around and asking on Stack Overflow for help with that command line issue? Yeah, it's very common, because the closer you get, there are just so many things that can go wrong. So in a browser, somebody else is in charge of making sure everything works. So you can go to a website like Code Sandbox, which I love. I think it's really well built. I talked to the guy who created it. He's a sprightly European guy. And you can just, let's see. I mean, it's so cool. He loves animation. He constantly tinkers with the animation too. So I'm going to try to drag this and make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so Code Sandbox. Let's try an Angular project. Why not? How many people have tried to set up their own Angular project before? How many people spent more than an hour setting up their Angular project? Okay, so we just set up our first Angular project with a single click. And now we're in this web-based IDE. We've got our files over here. This is all using VS Code, whatever it's called, Visual Studio's code, Microsoft's code, which is open source and free and quite powerful. Like pretty much everybody I know has switched to it. A lot of people still use JetBrains. I like JetBrains tools. This is night mode. I don't know how easy it is to see this. There might be a way to switch it to day mode. Appearance. Lucy, what's that? Is that bright? It did not immediately take effect, so I can only assume Lucy looks exactly like the other one. Okay, so I guess it just changes the color of the syntax highlighting and stuff. But this is a really cool tool. I would encourage everybody to check this out. But this is just one of many examples of pushing software development into the browser. Now with GitHub, we could all pull out our laptops and follow this tutorial step by step And that would be the best way for me to ensure that you all actually do it. But instead, I'm just going to say, hey, when you get a chance before the end of the month, go through this tutorial. You can get a free shirt and you can make some contributions to freeCodeCamp. So a lot of people ask me about the scale of freeCodeCamp. I'm jumping around a little bit, but a lot of people do ask me about that. And I'm just going to use SimilarWeb because it's a good like objective measure without me having to log in and show you Google Analytics and everything. But you can just plug in like freeCodeCamp, and it's gonna pull up, you know, like 16.7 million people visited freecodecamp.org last month. So it is a lot of people that are using it, and that may seem like a really large number, but you have to remember that that is like 0.001% of the people on Earth. Not even that. I think it's 0.0001 or something. It's not that many people. The Earth is big. People all around the world use freeCodeCamp. Tons of people in India use it. Tons of people in Brazil, Vietnam. Nigeria is a big country. Kenya is a big country. Even Canada, which didn't make the list for some reason. English-speaking countries generally use it the most. That is unfortunate because we want people in all countries to be able to use it. And a lot of people speak Spanish natively. They speak Arabic. They speak Chinese. So what we've done is we've gone into freeCodeCamp/freeCodeCamp. And we've gone in here and we've refactored our entire curriculum to be able to have lots of different languages. Like for example, here's Arabic. So I'm just going to dive into some random challenge here, and you can see what it looks like. Let's go to a Redux challenge, and you can see what it looks like in Arabic. Ooh, that's not good. I'm going to tell Bo about that. Let's find a different one. Please don't all be undefined. Here we go. So you can see that that's freeCodeCamp in Arabic. Now some of these don't have instructions; they just have the description, and then they have the test code and everything associated with it. So we're working on making freeCodeCamp accessible to the vast majority of people who don't speak English, certainly not natively. How many people here speak a second language? Okay, how many of you would be comfortable trying to learn a complex skill like coding in that second language? Some of you would, right? Yeah. But for me, I speak Chinese. I lived in China for 5 years. And I would definitely not want to sit down and try to learn, Redux in Chinese. That would be additional layers of complexity. So this is one of the big initiatives that freeCodeCamp is undertaking, is globalizing freeCodeCamp and making it to where this global community of like less than 30% of people who use freeCodeCamp are in the US, making it more accessible to all these people. So not only have we translated the entire curriculum, which I'm just going to go ahead and show you what the freeCodeCamp curriculum looks like in case you haven't seen it before. If you have seen the curriculum recently, like within like 3 months or earlier, you haven't seen the newest curriculum. So the new curriculum is much more comprehensive than it used to be. We have 6 certifications, including a 7th ultimate certification that you can earn if you complete it. If you complete the other 6, the full stack developer certification. But we have responsive web design, which is just HTML, CSS, no JavaScript, no libraries either. You're not using Bootstrap or anything like that. So you just build web apps using those. And I'm going to show you what one of them looks like real quick. So we'll go to the technical documentation page. So these are the instructions, and you can see the actual demo app right here. And in the upper left-hand corner, assuming there's not some sort of ad block or anything, there should be tests that show up that I can run. I'm not sure why the tests aren't showing up in the upper left-hand corner. Again, like this is a huge project maintained by 5 people, plus hundreds of contributors, so things constantly break. So I'm not going to apologize for the broken tests. I'm just going to keep moving and note that in my mind so I can create issues at the end. Okay, so here we go. This is a product landing page. Somebody created a website that sells trombones, and they even got this video of a military guy playing a trombone. Pretty cool. So you can hit run tests, and it's going to run all the tests, and it's going to tell you how many tests passed. So this is a new feature. Evaluation criteria baked right into your project. It's a CDN link. You can just pull it into your project, and boom, you can run tests wherever you build, whether you build it on Code Sandbox, CodePen, whether you build it on your local computer, whether you build it on a public library computer or your friend's computer that you've never touched before today. You can go in and you can build a project and you can get all the tests passing. You can do it on a mobile phone. You can do it on a tablet. So these are some of the efforts we're doing to just make it easier, because a lot of people don't have access to a laptop. I get direct messages on Twitter every day from people in Bangladesh that want money so they can buy a laptop. And unfortunately, I don't have the resources to buy everybody a laptop. But I can tell them, go to the library, go to a local university, just use the public computer. You complete the entire thing. Because you're not installing anything, you can work through the entire curriculum completely in the browser. So the core value of freeCodeCamp above all else is accessibility. We want to make it so anybody in the world can use freeCodeCamp and can use it without having to spend a lot of money on data. If they happen to be in a country where it costs a lot of money to like if you watch YouTube on your phone and you're in India, that can be a very expensive proposition. But if you happen to pull everything down and it's just a couple JSON objects, a few kilobytes worth of data, no big deal, right? So that's why we've architected freeCodeCamp the way we did. So you can run this anywhere. You don't have to have a computer. You don't have to be able to install Node.js on that computer. You don't have to be able to install Git. It doesn't have to have a Linux-style command line on it. So we're doing everything we can to make freeCodeCamp more accessible. Another way we're making things more accessible is if we go to the curriculum and we choose, let's just choose like one of these basic HTML. We'll do add images to your website. So I'm going to make it a little smaller, and I'm going to scroll down. I don't know if we're going to get sound, but if you click watch a video, I'm going to make it louder. I don't know how to make it louder. Wait. It's not letting me make it louder. But it's basically Bo, one of our contributors. Has anybody heard of Bo Carnes? He has recorded these videos for every single challenge in the first certification. He's almost done with the second certification. Do you know how to? Yeah, absolutely.
So PCI has gotten us some pizza. So maybe just slowly trickle to grab a little pizza and keep so Quincy can keep going. But I'm sure people want to have something.
Thanks.
Question about doing so.
Yeah. Do you know how to turn the sound up?
I don't think we have the sound connected to it.
That's okay. So just imagine that you're hearing Bo's soothing Michigan voice as he reads different things. He can pull up slides. Okay, so this is cool. Oh, you embedded YouTube into freeCodeCamp. Actually, this isn't YouTube. This is a video editor that has an audio track, a heavily compressed audio track that sounds good enough. And all of this is code. Check this out. I can just click in and change it. Then I can run it. Let's just reload this. And I just made that ipsum. Did I break everything? Oh, there it is. So I just typed a slash in the middle of that lorem ipsum or kitty ipsum text. So you can change it in real time, and then you can just press play. It'll keep going. You can pause it. You can go over here. Like let's look. Like this only has one file, but I can pull up the different slides and stuff. I think you might even be able to drag stuff around. Maybe not in this version. You can drag this around. Check this out. Woo! You can open it in the browser. So this is our friends in Norway who have an education-focused project called Scrimba. And we've been working closely with them to integrate Scrimba into the platform. So that's cool. You can change the stuff. Okay, but where's the real value added? This video is 1/100th of the size of a YouTube video of a comparable length. 1/100th. Because it uses DOM elements and manipulates the DOM, and it has very basic description, and it just has audio instead of having a rich video, a 720p video file. We can make it incredibly small, so it loads instantly, even if you're on a 3G connection in Bangalore, and you're able to watch it. It's pretty profound. And it doesn't cost you really anything because it's virtually nothing. So it loads quickly and it doesn't use your data. So this is the kind of tech that we're trying to bring into freeCodeCamp. Another thing we want to do is we want to make freeCodeCamp completely offline first, where you can disconnect from the internet completely. Let's say you're going up into the mountains. You want to summit Black Rock, and when you're up there, Black Rock, what's the one, the really tall one in Yosemite? Anybody going to chime in? Dome, half dome, something like that. My brother did it. I haven't done it yet. But you can go up there and you can have the entire web app loaded on your phone. And it's not a mobile app. It's just a progressive web app that basically loads, because all of freeCodeCamp is only a few megabytes. The entire curriculum, the entire guide. So we're figuring out ways to make things smaller, make things faster, make things easier to embed, make things to where you don't need to have an internet connection, because a lot of people don't have internet connections. I was talking with Bobby, who had to leave, about the prospect of taking freeCodeCamp and putting it into prisons. Well, there are already prisoners who are working on, they're paying their time, and when they get out, they want to be able to work, productively in society. And one of the skills that they can learn while they're in prison is coding. There's just a big catch. Prisoners aren't allowed to get on the internet. So how do you learn to code when you don't have access to the internet? Well, you take a free open source comprehensive curriculum like freeCodeCamp and you run it on a local server. That's what they're doing in San Quentin. That's what a lot of other prisons around the United States are doing. They're running freeCodeCamp locally on a local network, and then people are just connecting and inmates are working through it together. They don't have Stack Overflow. It's probably 20 times harder than it is if you have an internet connection, but they can do it. So all the time and energy we put into refining freeCodeCamp's curriculum and expanding and improving the freeCodeCamp guide, that's stuff that can potentially go on a local network. It could go on a school out in the mountains. It could anywhere. Small files. One of the things we're talking about doing is taking Raspberry Pis, installing freeCodeCamp on them, and just shipping them to different places where they don't have very good access to uninterrupted electricity. Like a lot of people who use freeCodeCamp are in Bangladesh, for example. Bangladesh is notorious for just having tons of outages, and if you have like a very low wattage Raspberry Pi, you have a low wattage monitor, you can potentially code right on that without having consistent internet access or power supply. So these are the kinds of things we'd like to do. We'd like to potentially have a campaign where we sell Raspberry Pis and you buy 2 Raspberry Pis. One you get to keep for your kids and yourself, and the other one goes off to a school in South Asia, for example, or Africa. So we're working on a lot of different things like that. The overriding principle, accessibility, extending access. We've already achieved to the extent possible for a web app, I think, like socioeconomic blindness, if you will, where it doesn't matter how little resources you have. If there's a public library in your town, you can go and you can get on and you can work through the freeCodeCamp curriculum. So this is just the next evolution of that. And a lot of people ask, like, why is that so important? I personally believe that learning to code is as important as learning how to read was during the Reformation. As important as learning how to do basic math was during the Industrial Revolution. As important as learning how to drive a car was during the 1920s and 30s, when so much of our economy shifted to needing to be able to drive a car to move stuff or to get to a location so you can live in the burbs. I think learning to code is on the same order of magnitude in terms of importance. And I think doctors are going to need to learn to code. Scientists are going to need to learn to code. Most scientists actually do spend a big chunk of their time coding. Lawyers are going to need to learn to code. There are a ton of lawyers in the freeCodeCamp community that are able to use code to do their jobs wildly more efficiently than their non-coding peers. Accountants, that's a field where you're dealing with lots of procedure. You need to write custom code to address very specific workflows that only you go through that are specific to a client. Coding is incredibly general purpose, and everybody can benefit from knowing how to do it. And it doesn't have to be the sort of thing where you have to go and enroll in a master's degree program to learn to code. It doesn't have to be the sort of thing where you have to drop everything and go to an intensive boot camp to learn to code. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with master's degrees in computer science or with coding boot camps. All I'm saying is that we should also have good enough options for people who are working and have kids and mortgages and need to be focused on those existing responsibilities and want to be able to code at their own pace as time permits. So that's why freeCodeCamp is so big on accessibility. We believe that there's an incredible wave of automation coming that's going to wipe out a lot of the more routine jobs. If you can describe your job, if you can train somebody in a day to do it, if it's not like a very people-focused job, there's a good chance that those instructions could be fed to a machine, and then that one person could do the work of 10 people or 100 people. And we've seen this throughout time. If you look at farming, it's mostly automated. An individual farmer is potentially hundreds of times more efficient than at the dawn of agriculture 6,000 years ago. You don't have people going and sticking rice into paddies anymore. You have machines that are operating based on machine learning algorithms, figuring out optimal times to plant, where to plant, what additional materials to put to make sure that you optimize the yield. There are so many different things that have happened in agriculture that I think are also happening in manufacturing. You could argue that they've largely already happened. If you go to a Tesla gigafactory, there are very few humans working there. Mostly it's just software engineers that aren't even on site that are configuring things. And that's manufacturing, and I think to a large extent it's happening with services as well. I'm not saying that all the jobs are going to necessarily disappear, but if you want to be able to get a really well-paying job where you don't have to be afraid that some consultant's going to come in and start analyzing your job and figuring out how to automate it, then learning software engineering and basic computer science principles, that could be a huge edge. So that's one of the reasons why I strongly encourage everybody to learn to code. So I'm going to grab a slice of pizza and then I'm going to answer any questions you all have. But I just want to close this soliloquy with accessibility, extending access. This is not some sort of winners takes all thing. This is about dramatically improving the productivity of humanity. And we've got a lot of people who are sitting around not achieving anywhere near their potential that technology could help them achieve, and we can help them do that. At this point, quite literally any questions other than my production credentials of freeCodeCamp or something like that. I'm happy to give.
I'd like to ask, what do you think the future of coding is going to be as technology develops, things get more sophisticated? Are computers going to be writing their own code?
Well, to some extent, I'm sorry.
They do it.
To some extent, we already have programs that will write code. A lot of programming depends on knowing, like computers are quite dumb. A computer is basically like a processor is basically a rock that we tricked how to think. We just tell them exactly what to do and they do it. It's very rare that you'd have a program that could make good decisions on its own, although we are seeing that to some extent, like with AlphaGo. They basically just set an AI down and it didn't even know it knew the basic rules of Go, the Chinese game that you play with stones. And it taught itself how to beat the best players in the world, just playing itself. So yes, we do have situations like that but that's a very constrained field. I mean, Go is a game where there are, more possible games than there are particles in the known universe, but still, it's a very specific thing. If you think about how complex reality is, if you think about how complex the decisions that you make every day, just driving down the road, I mean, self-driving cars, it's going to be years before they're as good as like a professional driver who has a lot of experience, assuming that they've had rest and everything like that. Just like all the different judgments and corner cases and things like that. Things are happening though. I mean, we are moving in that direction. I like to think of the future of programming. I watch a lot of Star Trek. Does anybody here like Star Trek? Voyager is a really good. Oh, cool. Voyager is a really cool series. I think it doesn't get as much credit because it came on the tail of Next Generation, and Next Generation got all the love, and there wasn't enough love left for Voyager. But if you watch Star Trek Voyager, every character can program. They are all writing algorithms, and they're sitting down and analyzing data and using software, and they spend a lot of time on computers. And the way they program is basically just increasingly declarative. So if you think of like punch cards and telling a computer exactly which bit to flip and what should be in the memory register and things like that, the old IBM punch cards from the 50s or 60s, that would be incredibly imperative, meaning you're telling it exactly what you want it to do. Declarative being kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where you're like, I want you to do a full spectrum analysis of the planet's surface, and then I want you to cross-reference that with, XYZ, and then I want you to take all that and then run it against, this database that we have from this section. I mean, really, all you're doing is doing a big join, right? But you're doing it with all this domain knowledge. You know what needs to be done, and you're telling the computer what to do. It's not a whole lot different from you double tapping, the home button on your phone or whatever, and scrolling through the app and telling it, open this. It's just that, we're climbing higher and higher layers of abstraction to where what you're telling to a computer could be instructions that you assign to an intern, for example. But humans are still in the loop to a large extent. There are scenarios where humans might not be in the loop. I don't like those scenarios because we have such little understanding of what's happening with machine learning. If you ask a scientist, what conclusion a machine learning algorithm came to, they can tell you, and they can potentially look back at what may have caused that, but they have limited insight into the actual decision process of the neural network, and that is kind of terrifying. So that's one of the reasons we need to get more people into technology, so that we have a more inclusive community where more people are thinking hard about these things, philosophers, people with a military background, and thinking about all these additional implications beyond, oh, cool, it did this thing, So having people who don't have domain expertise and just know software engineering is kind of dangerous, really. But I'm hopeful that we'll, have lots of multidisciplinary people who approach software from a lot of different angles and think about what's the utility for the human race, rather than, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if I built this, So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I do think that humans will continue to be involved. Technically, if you're worried about automation, software engineering is the act of automation. So by definition, software engineers are the last jobs that's going to be fully automated. So you've got at least as much job security as anybody else if you learn to code. Other questions?
What's like the early story of freeCodeCamp? Like, how did you get early users? How did you build it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a Cinderella story. I got super lucky. I'd been a teacher and a school director for about 10 years, and then I just was in the trenches, San Francisco, doing hackathons every weekend. I probably did like 30 or 40, and just sitting in the free cafes and like free co-working. Like I'd go to a hackathon, I'd win like co-working space for 6 months. And so I worked at Wix. I don't know if you've heard of the website builder tool. They had a big hackathon, and my friend told me like, hey, if you win, then you get like 6 months of free co-working and like tons of yogurt and cereal and stuff. So we did it, and then I just worked in there. And like, of course, I had so many abandoned, crash and burn education projects. I've always focused on the domain of education. And one point, like I had this tool that was called Course Forward, and it would build a sequence of online courses, because this was right when free online courses started blowing up, MOOCs as they're often called. And I had a theory that you could take all the existing books, like O'Reilly books and Packed Press and all these other Manning publications, and then that with all the different online courses that were on Coursera and edX and all these other platforms, and all these other resources, you could potentially build an ad hoc curriculum for anything. And so the idea was, we pull in your LinkedIn profile, figure out what your skills are, what experience you have, how many years you have working with different technologies. Then we ask you, what do you want to do? What's your next job? Is your next job going to be, doing business intelligence? Right? Do you want to become a machine learning engineer? And then it would basically create a path through a bunch of online resources and some books that you had to pay for. And not everything was free. It was an affiliate model. If you're curious, like we were going to get money from affiliate marketing, like we sent people to different resources and then they pay a small amount. But anyway, it turned out, even after I spent like 18 months getting it working and making it really fast, I'd show it to people and they'd be like, oh, cool. And that's not what you want to hear. Oh, cool. They want to hear, oh, okay, where do I sign up? Or like, here, let me create an account. I'm going to start using this. Or hey, honey, come over and look at this. You want to hear that sort of stuff. You don't want to hear, oh, cool, because that means basically like, oh, you built a neat thing that's fancy that nobody's going to use. So that's precisely what happened. And I quickly learned that I should have paid more attention to my friends who were practicing, agile software development and lean startup methodology and things like that, because that stuff works. You ask people what they want. You build what they want. You don't think that you're, Henry Ford and that you're going to build a car when everybody's asking for a faster horse. You ask people what they want, and that is a way better strategy than trying to, what the Chinese call, I'm going to bust out the Chinese idiom, Bi mian zao che, which means like close the doors and build the chariot indoors, which is a horrible strategy for building anything. The idea being that you need to take the chariot out on the road and see how it reacts to the environment. You need to get impressions from people. So yeah, I spent like 18 months building this really sophisticated piece of software that I was very proud of. I learned a ton building it, but nobody wanted to use it because nobody wanted to spend years of their life working through dozens of different books and courses that an algorithm would spit out in 1 second. So yeah, that was like, so I basically looked at that and I was like, oh man, this is way too complicated. People hate it, or they don't hate it, they're just indifferent, which is even worse. So I thought, how could I make this simpler and make this more useful? And I just started stripping things away. It was a very cathartic process. And ultimately, I was like, what's the one thing that every human being should learn right now in 2014, which is when freeCodeCamp launched. It was actually, damn, did I miss freeCodeCamp's birthday? It was slightly over 4 years ago. So what's the one thing that every human being would benefit from learning right now? JavaScript. It's the lingua franca of the web. You can build quite literally anything. You can build Internet of Things devices. You can build mobile apps. You can build APIs. Of course, because it's the lingua franca of the web, it's great for websites. So I decided, let's just build a single curriculum, not some sort of, algorithm that generates unique curriculum, but let's build a single curriculum and people can work through that. And that was kind of the big insight, like a single. If you think about the Appalachian Trail, everybody goes the exact same path. There's all this lore, like, oh yeah, when you see this tree, be sure to turn here. You can always ask the people in front of you, like, hey, what's up ahead? They got people who are coming back and tell you. So the fact that it's linear is a feature. It's not a bug. A lot of people are like, oh, you should cover, Python a lot more extensively and do all this stuff. And I'm like, no, we need to have a single focused curriculum that teaches you the good enough stuff so that you can get your first developer job, which, as I think I've established, is where you really start to learn. So, it was that insight. And so 3 days, I just threw away all the code that I built, like 18 months of my life. And I just started fresh. My friend Sahat had this project called the Hackathon Starter. It was meant for building hackathon projects, but I was like, hey, it's already got like Node and Passport and all these other different libraries strapped together. I was like, I'll just use this. So I just spent 3 days. I would go to like AWS. AWS had like this free cafe in downtown San Francisco. There are a lot of places in downtown San Francisco where you can just hang out, basically, because companies want you to use their APIs, and it works. We spend a ton of money on AWS every month. So, yeah, they want to basically get people to jump into their ecosystem and have a good feeling for them as developer relations. But I'd sit in there, I'd pester people like, hey, how do I do this? And I just hacked on it for like 3 days, and then I stood it up. And at that point, I had already been building my reputation, building my network, all those other things. So I was able to basically say, hey, freeCodeCamp, it's exactly what you think it is. And people would come and they'd use it, and miraculously, they wouldn't say, oh, cool. They would get heads down and start working through the curricula. So that was a big turning point for me. And then over the course of, within a couple months, we had more than 10,000 people on the platform. Within a couple years, we had more than 1 million people on the platform, and it's just grown. So my humble advice, if you're tinkering toward something that you think can succeed at scale, just keep doing it and keep asking questions of yourself. Don't get into a rut and think that you have, like, your thought experiments have arrived at some immaculate conception. The reality is you're going to have to iterate. You're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to constantly get feedback. You're going to have to listen to your users. If you don't have users, you're going to just have to do hallway usability studies where you bum rush somebody in the hallway and be like, hey, check this. What do you think of this? So, yeah, I mean, it's the reason most people scrub out. Most startups fail. Most founders go work at BCG or some of those other consulting companies, or they just end up working at companies. And the other thing was, I had already worked as a software engineer, and I had domain expertise. I'd worked as a teacher and a school director for 10 years. So I had kind of done everything right in terms of not just rushing in as a fresh graduate trying to do a startup or start, in this case, an NGO. So that's another thing I'd say. Life experience and domain expertise are incredibly valuable in helping you see what really needs to be done and what people really want, and those kinds of things. Like, I'd run a school, so I knew how to do basic management, and I knew how to hire a team, and I knew how to budget and project and do all those kinds of things. So all of that experience you may think is like irrelevant, just working your normal day job, can be incredibly valuable, which is why I encourage people to not quit their day job and to try to learn to code in tandem with their day job. Or if you've already got a developer job, continue to refine your skills, but don't let go of that job. You can learn so much from there. And you never know, you could get, you might get an offer from another company, but if you want to stay where you are, you can potentially get a pay bump that way or get a promotion that way. There are so many avenues to expanding your career if you really take agency over it.
So I'm a novice, but on this coding, how does it work into mobile apps and into servers and stuff like that? How does that all combine together? Are there different coding programs you got to use to mix that, or?
Yeah, so I can give you a highlight. Like, I don't have like a whiteboard to draw on. I guess there's one over there, but I'm not going to try to do like a proper lecture. I'll just explain this. So there's basically like a front end and a back end. The front end would be the mobile application, like it's in front of the user, and the back is like behind. If you imagine the mobile phone, and then way behind the mobile phone, on the server farm in Virginia, usually, that's where all the Amazon and Google servers are. So if you imagine back there, that's where a lot of the server logic, and so there's code on the front end that basically does the quick, I press this button, I want to expand this menu. A lot of that's written in JavaScript. If you're doing like a mobile application, it might be written in Android, or maybe written in Objective-C or Swift on an iOS app. But basically, there's like the presentation code, and sometimes you'll do something on the mobile app that'll need an internet connection, because what it's doing is it's going to those servers, the backend, and it's telling the database, hey, we need to update the database because this person just said they don't want this Uber anymore. Or maybe you want to summon an Uber and you're like, hey, I want to get a car, and it's sending your location and your desire to get an Uber and your desired destination to a server, and then it's saying, okay, who do we have in this place? So it's processing a lot of that stuff on the back end. So the back end can be in anything. The front end can basically be in anything. Again, what I said earlier, don't worry too much about the tools. A lot of these decisions, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer necessarily. You can write mobile apps in JavaScript if you want. There's React Native. There's Cordova. There are all sorts of tools. That's why I would encourage people to just stick with one thing and get really good at it. And specialization, I mean, there's still COBOL programmers. There's still job opportunities for Cold Fusion, things that people thought would have sunsetted 20 years ago. There's still so many opportunities. So if you can really just focus, and a lot of this will just become second nature as you practice. That's why I strongly emphasize just practice, practice, practice. The more web applications you build, the more mobile applications you build, the more your kind of tacit understanding of how everything fits together will materialize in your mind. And that's expertise. That's when you hire a senior developer, you're trying to bring in somebody who has a really concrete idea of how things fit together at a conceptual level. Joe.
You mentioned coding every day. When you say coding, is that just using your fingers to put out code? Is that book learning? Making new apps? What would you kind of quantify? What's the best use of that time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're working through a curriculum, if you're working through freeCodeCamp, if you're working through like Eloquent JavaScript or some of these other books, if you're working through Learn.js the hard way, or my favorite, You Don't Know JS. It's a really good series. Those series, that surely counts. If you're exercising your coding mind, you're reading code, trying to understand how it works. Now you can get into this kind of slump where you're like, oh, I'll just fire up a YouTube tutorial and I'll just watch that while I, eat dinner. That's not really coding. Like, I would say you should proactively be like actually examining the code and playing with it. And that's why Code Sandbox, freeCodeCamp, CodePen, all these resources where you can actually interact in the browser are so convenient. You just fire it up and you can be coding right there. So I would say if you're actually reading code, that could be considered. But if you're just watching somebody else code, that's probably doesn't count. I don't know if that's a good rule of thumb for that.
You mentioned like throwing some carrots out into the street, but like, at what point do you feel like your carrot's good enough to be on the street, and like, who do you show it to exactly? Like, what have you noticed that like is better? Friends' opinion, just publicize on Twitter. How do you go about that?
Yeah, well, the general rule is if you're not utterly embarrassed by your first release, you waited too long to release. So there's not really a too soon. You'll know it's too soon if you just get crickets. But that's one of the things, if you build up a Twitter following, you have people who are going to see it and they'll be like, just hanging out at the airport or something. They'll be like, oh, okay, what's this? And they'll click through it. And maybe they'll have the kindness of giving you a comment like, oh, I used your cryptocurrency price tracker app or something like that, right? And oh, it looked cool, but I noticed this was wrong. You're getting feedback, right? Any feedback is positive. So, but I wouldn't worry about being too soon. I would say even if you just hack together a very clear proof of concept. I mean, you look at like game development. That's a great field. If you really want to get into a competitive field where you have to consider performance and all these other things, and you've just got a brutal market of competitors, go into game development. So even if you do like potato-y, like where you basically don't have any textures, you've got like the most simple gameplay elements, but you strip it down to the basic elements, like you strip Doom down to its basic elements, it's still fun. If you strip Tetris down to its, I mean, how could you strip Tetris down? But it's the most basic things, and it has the core functionality, and you can see if people like it, that kind of core gameplay loop. If it's a learning app, are people completing it? Do they get a feeling of satisfaction? Do they continue to the subsequent one? You can just throw a bunch of JavaScript analytics actions and things in there and track people that way in case you don't actually get any subjective feedback. But any data you can get from potential users is worthwhile. And the thing I like to tell people is things are so ephemeral. People are not focused on you. They're not thinking every day like, gee, when's Kimberly's new app going to drop, right? They're not necessarily like, oh, yeah, I remember that one app that Kimberly made. That was too soon. It wasn't ready for prime time. They're not thinking that. They are ambivalent. The universe is indifferent, and you don't have to worry too much about the universe caring about negative things. You could suffer 1,000 wounds, but if you get one victory, then that's all you need. Like freeCodeCamp. Everything I did before freeCodeCamp, nobody cared about. So I would just say keep tinkering and don't be daunted by the crickets. And be thankful for the haters, because at least they're giving you feedback.
Have you noticed like one community like more better feedback than another? Like Twitter versus Reddit versus
Yeah, I can tell you the most brutal, it's probably Hacker News. The most sycophantic is probably Product Hunt. Like if you put a product on Product Hunt, a lot of people will upvote it, but don't take that as feedback. Don't take that as they even use your product, right? They're just kind people. Sycophantic is a bad word. I didn't mean to say that. They're generous people who want to support each other in their product endeavors, but they're not going to critically tear apart a product generally because they don't want to make the person who put themselves out there look bad. Hacker News, they don't care. They'll just tell you like, oh, there's this JavaScript bug on your site, and like that'll be the comment that everybody upvotes, right? Not like oh, this is really great. In fact, people will downvote things that are like, oh, this is really great. This doesn't add to the conversation. You don't need to compliment this person. So yeah, and then Reddit is not a single community. It's millions of subreddits. So depending on what you're, if you're building a plant app that helps you keep track of time when you need to water your plants, put it in the planting subreddit. Don't put it in the R programming subreddit or the more general subreddit. The more specific you can get, the better. And each community is completely different. They have different moderator teams, and they have different likelihood of giving you positive feedback. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, everyone. Let's grab some pizza.